Well, we continue to focus on the tariff issue between the United States and Canada and President Donald Trump's decision to pause on a proposed 25% tariff on Canadian goods. A 10% tariff was proposed on critical minerals. Now, with just a 30-day breather, there are serious questions about how this move could impact Canada's vital role as a trusted supplier of critical minerals to the United States. Well, joining me to break this down is John Jacobs from the Bipartisan Policy Center. John is a leading voice on securing America's critical mineral supply chains and has contributed to key recommendations on resource stockpiling, market stability, and boosting U.S. competitiveness. Well, he joins us now. John, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So, John, perhaps before we start into, the depthful questions here, how has the mining fraternity in the United States digested this tariff saga?
The tariff issue is obviously ongoing. We have yet to see what a long-term outlook looks like for these tariffs. Obviously, a tariff on our closest allies will make our supply chains more dependent on inputs from countries that don't have these tariffs. But it's very much up in the air. I think we will need to wait and see what the long-term effects of this, both on the market, but also on the policy side. It's very to be determined on whether or not these tariffs will stay in place, they push them back for 30 days, what it looks like after that, and then the ongoing reviews.
And as you wait and consider these things, John, your report mentions how tricky it is to identify which minerals are indeed truly critical. How important is Canada's role in supplying these to the U.S.?
Right. Well, Canada is one of our best allies in terms of having resources on hand. We can really come up with a North American supply chain security that works exactly hand in glove with Canada for a lot of these minerals. That being said, there are a lot of issues where even if we mine in North America or in the United States, a lot of these minerals are being shipped to China for processing. And if they are going through Chinese processing supply chains and re-imported back into America, it's hard to claim those supply chains are secure.
Now, it's linked to something else you talk about in these reports, creating a critical minerals reserve. Would tariffs on Canadian miners make that harder for the U.S. to achieve, I would assume?
It doesn't help. Tariffs on our allies is not a great way to lean ourselves, get ourselves off of Chinese inputs. The goal here should be to make U.S. critical minerals, the final product after processing, competitive with imports from less strategic competitors abroad. So we need to make sure that Canadian processed minerals, that American processed minerals, Australian processed minerals, or those coming from our allies in Europe, are economically competitive with imports from China. That's difficult when China is currently overproducing minerals and dumping onto markets and forcing prices so low, where sustainable, normally economically viable projects in North America are no longer able to compete with these Chinese imports. But it doesn't help if you then put further tariffs on the imports of our allies. It's only going to make Chinese imports more competitive compared to the alternatives.
And I suppose that's where your missing midstream report highlights those challenges in processing. Am I right?
That's right. We tried to demystify the term critical mineral. Everyone talks about critical minerals, but really these are completely different markets. The lithium market looks nothing like the rare earth mineral market. And same goes for copper, which is a very developed, massive commodity market compared to a lot of the more niche rare earth minerals that are small volume markets. A lot of those transactions are done bilaterally, just a couple of contracts between a couple companies, where lithium and copper are traded on exchanges. So what we did is we looked at those different markets and looked at the investment challenges that U.S. projects are facing to identify what policies do we need to overcome this competition problem that we're facing in the U.S., where our projects are not able to compete on the global stage with those of our competitors in China.
John, I mean, you're a think tank. You get these opinions coming from different stakeholders, and possibly one or two big issues is just the impact overall on the economy, but also innovation. And I'm wondering, what did you gather from your talks and your research on how these tariffs would impact those two, particularly innovation as we move to this green objective that we so desperately need?
Right. I haven't quite considered how the tariffs would impact innovation, but I think there's really two major ways to secure American supply chains in the critical mineral sector. One is to combat the pricing challenges. You can both address real challenges like the market manipulation aspects of Chinese overproduction that is forcing market prices lower, artificially lower than what they should be, and forcing U.S. projects offline. You can directly confront that, but you can also leapfrog existing technologies that they are using to process their minerals. You can create new technologies that are more efficient, that have less byproducts and waste and less emissions than their imports. And by doing that, you can not just like have the same type of project in the U.S. that's less economically competitive with it without these different restrictions on imports, but you can actually push the U.S. industry and the Canadian industry to a point where we are more competitive because of our innovative technology than the Chinese industry that is still using traditional processing techniques.
And as I wrap up, I mean, through all of this, what you want to do is avoid damaging that vital supply chain between the U.S. And Canada. You've got Canadian miners on one side, and you've got the U.S. policymakers on the other. What should they focus on during this 30-day period?
We need to make sure that Canadian critical minerals can flow into the U.S. without going through markets that are owned by foreign entities of concern or our competitors. That is a much bigger project than can be accomplished in 30 days, but any barriers that essentially are forcing our imports from our allies through China is a problem. And we need to be looking at policies where we can secure supply chains with our allies rather than forcing more exports through the Chinese processing monopoly that's then imported back into the U.S. So we really need to be thinking about how we can work hand in glove between Canadian miners and a new U.S. processing sector that is just on the cusp of coming to be, where offtake agreements do not go through Chinese processing projects.
Well, we'll leave it there. John Jacobs from the Bipartisan Policy Center, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me.